Tap Room here on the Ball Don't Lie podcast, where if you've been watching on YouTube, you were seeing my NBA festival shirt because I have no allegiance to Skeets. I'm not a Raptors fan like you. I don't even have allegiance to Team USA. I was kind of rooting for Canada in the World Cup. It was the better story. So that's why I'm really intrigued. Like, my dad never really had an NBA team himself. He was like a North Jersey kid. He always was in love with Dr. J. So he was like kind of torn between the New York Nets and the New Jersey Nets. And then he went to Philly. He didn't really know where to go before him and my mom settled in South Jersey, which, locked in the Philly-ness for myself. So he was always rooting for the underdog. And it is more interesting to see South Sudan come within a whisper of beating USA than USA mollywhopping the 33rd ranked team in FIBA. So the Americans are minus 650, the runaway favorites to win gold in France. First, the opening games taking place in Lille, the finals taking place in Paris, where everything else is going down. And I just, as we were talking about before the break, I'm skeptical. When you really thought about it, as Team USA first lost to Lithuania in the World Cup last year, I was there in the stands at Mall of Asia Arena, just watching Lithuania know exactly where all their guys needed to be. And they didn't even have Domantas Sabonis. Mm-hmm. They're not in this tournament. But a team that beat them, Canada is. Germany is. Serbia, that nearly beat Germany in the gold medal game of the World Cup, is. France now has Victor Wembanyama. Greece is back with Giannis. And as much as I think the Greek national team doesn't have the same firepower necessarily as these other teams we're talking about, they've got Giannis. So let's start with your home countrymen, the Canadians, led by Brooklyn Nets first-year head coach Jordi Fernandez, who I think his run coaching this Canadian program in the World Cup last year was a big help in getting the Brooklyn job. Not so directly, but it definitely helped that the size are Canadian, and they have always loved the idea of being connected to potential star players who should become available soon. And there's a lot of those guys in theory who wear red and white. So I'm going to kind of step back. I'm going to give the ball to you on the perimeter and let you isolate here. I've got some thoughts and some questions I do want to make sure we tick if you don't get them off your first impression. Not to say this is a test, but I'm curious where you stand on the Canadians and their quest to medal for the second time in a FIBA event since 1936.
Yeah, that's right. It has been a long time since they've actually got a medal at men's basketball in the Olympics. You're going back to 1936 here, guys. So it's a very long time, but they did get that bronze there in the last World Cup. It's tough. Like you already said it, Jake. This is by far the most talented men's Olympic tournament ever. I think it is. Like when you look at only being 12 teams, and yeah, maybe there's some teams with very little chance, but there's at least, when you include the States, of course, as the favorite, 5, maybe 6 teams that can make a compelling case to win a medal, if not the whole thing outright, because anything can happen in these single elimination sort of knockout rounds. Like once you get there, the game's only 40 minutes long. The variance in 3-point shooting matters. We saw it in the South Sudan game. They had guys that could not miss from 3, where the States were struggling. That can make for a compelling game. And suddenly you're like, oh my God, we lost to who? We lost how? But that's just like where we are in the world with the amount of talent on a lot of these rosters in Canada. To like zero in on them, it's all NBA talent. This is like what myself as a Canadian have been dreaming about for like 25 years. I remember I was actually in Australia. I took a year between high school and college to quote unquote find myself, basically just travel.
What'd you find?
Not much. I found a broke boy in the end. In fact, I went to Australia, had money for a couple months to travel around and then ran out of money. So I worked on a tree farm in Victoria. For 6 months, I ended up staying there because I loved it so much. And then I made all my money back and then went to New Zealand and so on and came back and finally went to school. But
you're like Brett Brown, except you didn't meet your wife and become an NBA head coaching
right.
pipeline guy.
That's right. That's right. But I did, while traveling, realize, hey, you know what? I'm going to do a podcast. They didn't even exist at that time, but I talked it into existence. But yeah, I was there watching that Canadian team led by Steve Nash and Todd McCullough. I think the only NBA players on that roster. Yeah,
Pinball Wizard Todd McCullough.
Yeah, thank you. And they they made a really good run. They were one of the best teams in the tournament, but they still finished 7th. And it was like this weird thing. I say they're one of the better teams because they had like a really good point differential and did well, but it's a weird sort of tournament. You lose the wrong game, you're screwed, right? You're not winning gold. But anyway, I remember like, wow, like this is the start of something. Like we're going to be really good. We're going to be a player in a men's basketball around the world in coming years. And look, that just took a long time to get there. And, thank God for the Vince Carters and the Nashes to grow up all these Canadian fans that fell in love with basketball and started playing it and got really committed to it. And now we have a roster full of these guys led by Shea. Obviously, Jamal Murray is a big question mark with his health. The last I've heard, he was like in this behind closed doors sort of game and played really good, really well. Yeah, and he played a lot of minutes. So
I have sent some texts out to see if while we're recording, I can get any report. So far, I'm 0 for 2 out of my 3 texts. People who I thought might know, but we'll see as we continue rambling here if I can get any info on how he looked.
I hope we get a scoop here live on the show. But and then we just have a bunch of really strong perimeter guys. Dylan Brooks, he was amazing against Wembanyama in one of their exhibition games. Played him one-on-one. Did as great his job as you could for giving up, a foot difference. Lou Dort, we talked about Nembhard, like Nickeil Alexander-Walker. Our perimeter is good, really good. Like maybe one of the best in the world when you're looking at just guard play. Our front court for Canada is a little thin, but they're like these wily sort of vet guys in Kelly Olynyk, and even Kem Birch is contributing, and Powell's there. So it's like you might be able to get by just enough. So, okay, this is a long-winded way to say, like, I believe they could medal. Like I do, like, either gold, silver, or bronze. But they are in the group of death, and I wouldn't even be all that shocked if they didn't get out of the group play. They're playing Greece with Giannis. They're playing Spain, who I know is a different iteration from like their glory days. It's like not the Gasol brothers, it's like the Hernan Gomez brothers, but they're still good. And then there's Australia as well, and they got a lot of NBA talent. Like these like one game sort of things where everything is so important in only this 12-team tournament. I'm trying to like lower my expectations. Like I don't want to be upset if they don't make it out of the group play, but I will be, because they are one of the best teams they should be on paper in the world. So this is like anything can happen. And I think the same goes a little bit for the States as well. I think people, at least in America, despite having a loaded team, there are going to be close games. They are not going to run over some of these teams, Germany, Serbia, so on. Like they might win gold, and they should, but it's not like I wouldn't bet on it. That's not a given.
It's not a given. And you mentioned a couple. So first, let's zoom back out really quickly. The Group A that you referred to, that Canada is playing in, has Australia, Greece, Spain, in addition to the Canadians. Jeez. Group B, France, Germany, Japan, Brazil. Group C, Serbia, South Sudan, Puerto Rico, USA. That's our 12-team field.
Right.
To your point about no one having a cakewalk, you really feel it when you're there on the ground. The 40-minute game compared to a 48-minute game. The quarter by quarter 2 minutes doesn't feel that different. But by the time you get to halftime and you look up and it's like, oh, we've played 2 quarters already and it went by in a breeze.
Yep.
All right, one text back.
Yes.
About Jamal Murray. We'll get to there. It goes by fast. And there's not as much stop and start with fouls.
That's right. They let them play in FIBA. And I love it. I honestly love it.
Joel Embiid can't flail his arms on Nikola Jokic, as we saw in that exhibition game, and just have a parade to the charity stripe. So all those factors, I think, especially, it affects the Canadians too, just as much as the Americans. The difference in I remember before the USA Canada game, there was all this talk in the media room about like, oh, this is going to be the most NBA FIBA game we've ever seen. And it still wasn't, because you're playing a different game. It's like if you play Monopoly with real money instead of Monopoly money, it's going to change the stakes, even though the game is the same. Maybe that analogy doesn't work, but Skeets laughed, so that's all that matters.
I've never heard somebody doing that, but I want to try it.
It'd be fun. Let's do it. You, me, Trey Kirby, Divine, we'll make it happen. But I think with Canada too, and Jamal Murray to me is he's the Kevin Durant of Canada in this instance, being that we saw a team, and Nembhard didn't play last year, and there was all this talk about like I remember Jordy being asked about this after they after they won the bronze medal, about like, there's a lot of the guys, from Andrew Wiggins to Jamal Murray, who have been part of this program in the past that weren't here now. Like, are they going to get to skip the line basically and come on board? And there was some questions about, that continuity factor and rewarding people who put in the time to help get Canada on the map like this. Jamal also, unlike KD, like, he comes into a position, to your point, Skeets, that is like loaded with talent.
Yeah.
I mean, he's not the best player at his own position on this team, with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander being, I remember when Canada finally got to Manila, I'm sure I've said this on the show before, and they squared up against Slovenia. Like, I wanted to see the Luka versus Shai matchup, and Shai, to me, was the best player on that floor. Flash forward to April, and Luka got him in a second round series that really did matter a little bit more. But Shai is the guy for the Canadian team, if there's any question about that. We have word from someone inside the Canadian program that Jamal did play yesterday in a closed-door scrimmage against Brazil, and he looked good. That is the report.
Okay.
That is
he looked good. That's it. All right.
Looked good.
Okay.
So, I would expect him to be involved, right? Especially if he's actually going to France to do this stuff, versus last year, if fans recall, he was pulled out of the World Cup after some early stuff because of fatigue and load management after the finals run and what have you. But yeah, I think the guy you called out, Dylan Brooks, to me is the guy to keep an eye on here, because he will be tasked with guarding up and down opponents' rosters, especially when you consider the fact that their group has various different like top players. Like, he can guard Giddey. We'll get to that later with Australia. He can hold his own against Giannis. And that, like, there's not many players in the world who can do that. And he's going to do that with even more of a snarl than what he does in the NBA, because he's got more to play for. I think there's more pride. The Canadians, you can speak to the Skeets, seem to have a bit of like an underdog chip on our shoulder. We're the younger brother of the Americans. Like, we're punching up type of mentality in this FIBA play. That seems a little bit more important. Like, how I remember there are a lot of guys, this is such a stretch, but there are a lot of guys back in my youth AAU days who just, when I saw them play for their high school compared to when I saw them play in the AAU circuit, just had like a different snarl to them, to use that word. So Dylan Brooks is the guy that I definitely want to keep an eye on here.